Hello and welcome to the third episode of HammerTime with me, Ralph Schoellhammer. I was reading through comments of the previous episodes and I'm very happy to announce that there will be a new feature starting next week. At the end of every show, I will have 15 to 20 minutes with a special guest, and I'm very much looking forward to recommendations, anybody you would like me to talk to, anybody you'll find particularly interesting that I could invite. So please go nuts in the comments and I will do the best that I can. One of you suggested that I talk to Benedict Beckelt, a philosopher who teaches in the United States and Germany, and he wrote a very interesting book on oikophobia, a topic we talked about in recent shows, this tendency within the West to hate itself, the guilt complex, if you will, within Western civilization. And I'm very happy to announce that he accepted my invitation. So on the fourth episode of HammerTime next week, there will also be an interview with Benedict, which I'm myself also very much looking forward to. Now, today I want to talk about something that once again is going to be a broader issue and that we will try to connect to all the different things. We talked about migration on this show, we talked about politics, we talked a little bit about economics, and I kind of want to look a little bit deeper into what connects these issues. And one of the things that we have seen and that I find remarkable and that I hope that we can also talk in the comments more about is one of the biggest phenomena of our time. And this phenomenon I would describe as that radical positions, particularly in the media and in the cultural sphere, are presented as the so-called moderate positions, whereas moderate positions are very often denounced and smeared as the radical positions. And I think this is only possible because we live through a period of the most massive gaslighting by the mainstream and legacy media that we have ever experienced. And I think this is particularly exemplified by what is currently going on in US politics, to an extent that I have to admit I would myself not have thought is possible. Look at what's going on with Joe Biden. I know many other podcasts have talked about this in the past, and you probably all read plenty of articles on this issue, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But I just want to kind of rerun a little bit the things that happened in recent weeks. Now, as you can all remember, after the debate with Donald Trump, there was this groundswell within the Democratic Party that Joe Biden has to resign from the presidency or definitely has to resign from running as the candidate for the next presidential election this fall. Now that over last weekend, he has decided to drop out of the race and free up the space for Kamala Harris. It's interesting to see that now the argument is, well, what Joe Biden has done here was like the most selfless act, the most patriotic act one can imagine. The Washington Post wrote that Joe Biden is now almost on a level of George Washington, right? Somebody who gives up power voluntarily even though he could hold on to it. Now, that is very intriguing because what you see is everybody knows, once again, who can trust their own eyes, everybody sees that the reason why Joe Biden is dropping out of the race is because he was dropping like an anvil in the polls vis-a-vis Donald Trump. So this was not that all of a sudden he realized that he should hand over the baton to a younger generation, as he claimed in his televised media appearance on Thursday. It is because they were afraid, and this would have been most likely, that he would lose the election to Donald Trump. So the media now frames the retreat of Joe Biden as some kind of heroic act, a man in power who gives up that power voluntarily. But it's the exact opposite, isn't it? In fact, the Democrats, they want to cling to power. So therefore, they decided to backstab Joe Biden and get him out of the race. Because as we all have seen over the last couple of years, from a viewpoint of whether or not he's capable of fulfilling the office of president, he has been incapacitated mostly for health reasons for at least the last 2 years. We talked about this on episode 1 and episode 2. So now that the evidence was mounting and he became simply unsustainable as a candidate, they forced him out and now they try to rephrase it and reframe it as some form of heroic act. And this is, once again, this is a radical move by the Democrats, right? You have the incumbent, the sitting president of the United States, who until very recently we were told is the best president of our lifetimes, which they are still telling us. This is the big irony of the story. So we are simultaneously being told that this is the best president there has ever been. Joe Biden himself, in his televised interview, in his televised presentation, if you will, on Thursday, said that his successes, his achievements would warrant a second term. So he himself believes he should actually be president for a second term because of all the great achievements that he has accomplished. Now, notwithstanding the fact that, again, if you look at his polls, a majority of the American people does not agree with this. But it's very odd. If he's so great, if he's so successful, then why is he not running for a second term? But this is this form of gaslighting and this kind of the modernization, if you want, or the kind of the acceptance of radical positions, and for lack of a better term, kind of the collusion of the media in an open lie. Right? Once there is this famous story by Hans Christian Andersen about the emperor's new clothes. Right? I'm sure you all know the story about the naked emperor walking through the streets, but everybody's pretending that he's wearing great clothes until a small child yells out, but the emperor is not wearing anything. But in the case of the Democrats, it seems that it's not only the lack of the emperor, it's also a lack of clothes in many ways. Because you cannot trust your eyes even when it comes to the lies. So it's a very odd thing that's going on. And I think this goes back to the issue I was saying at the beginning of today's show. The desire to stay in power, the desire of radical forces to remain control is so strong that they don't shy away at this point from even the most absurd lies. And the big problem here is, I think, not the political class, and this is why I differ from many of the communicators, I believe, and other commentators, which is this idea that the reason that what's going on is because there is a cabal of politicians and interest groups. I think that is partially true. But I believe the truly biggest problem is the media. And this is something we'll have to talk about in greater detail. Now, we mentioned Joe Biden, but I think it becomes even more obvious when we look at the candidate that's going to replace him, which is, of course, as it currently seems, Kamala Harris. Just shortly before the show went on air, we saw a phone call between Kamala Harris and the Obamas, so it's clear that now even Michelle and Barack Obama have thrown their weight behind Harris as the candidate. So all these rumors and these ideas that maybe it will ultimately be Michelle Obama who's going to be parachuted in last minute, maybe at the Democratic National Convention. I think all that speculation can be put to rest now. The candidate is going to be Kamala Harris and whomever she's going to pick as her running mate. And the big trouble is, once again, she's going to present it to us as a moderate candidate, right? On the one hand, as Hillary Clinton recently wrote in an op-ed for the New York Times, she's of course historic, right? She's the first Indian-American president. She would be the first Jamaican-American president. She would be the first African-American president, the first female president. You know, whatever identity politics box there is to check, she would check it. But they will also present it that she is, as Joe Biden again did in his address just a couple of hours ago, that she will be the force to defend democracy. This is still the big spiel of the left, not just in the United States, but all over the West. And you have to vote for center-left or left-leaning parties because they are the only ones who can defend democracy. Now, as I get to in a minute, you will see, I believe they're actually the biggest threat to democracy, but we'll get to this in a second. So, of course, if you take a closer look at the actual record of Kamala Harris, it turns out that by no means is she a moderate politician. She actually, throughout her career, has taken, one could say, in California, the usual left-leaning California political positions, but she has actually been a left-leaning radical for most of her political career. So let's take a first look at what GovTrack, which kind of was an institution that kind of rates politicians by their political leanings. They looked at Kamala Harris's legislative record in 2019, and what this shows is that out of 100 senators, she actually was the most left-leaning of all of them. More left-leaning, by the way, than Bernie Sanders. So on that list, Bernie Sanders is number 99, whereas Kamala Harris is number 100. So we are in this situation now where, by empirical methods, somebody was identified as the most left-leaning politician, the most left-leaning senator in the US Congress, that is now presented by the media to the voters as a centrist, as a moderate individual. Now, of course, you probably ask yourself, well, wait a moment. If that's the case, if she is indeed kind of the most radical ones and everybody can see this, well, that shall be easy to prove. But here's the issue. If you take a look at what's currently happening is they are scrapping the internet. So GovTrack, who made this ranking, they have now deleted this ranking from their webpage. Now, these are the absurd times we live in. So instead of facing up to the fact that, for whatever reason, the Democrats decided to run a political radical, every evidence that, in fact, she is a radical is now being scrapped from the internet. The commentator Maxim Lott, just to read a quick tweet to you, that emphasizes this quite nicely. So, GovTrack just deleted their own widely cited ranking from 2019, where they ranked Kamala Harris as the single most left-wing senator. Luckily, which is a good thing, we have the archives. So because the internet does not forget anything, but the attempt is still made to scrap the internet, to clean the internet of anything that could depict Kamala Harris as the radical that she truly is. And if we take a look at somebody, so are her positions truly radical, right? Or is this just, again, a smear used by the right-wing parties, a smear by the Republican Party, and in fact, she is a centrist. But she is not, and we have the receipts to show it. Now, this is a short video clip that shows some of her, let's say, more extreme positions in her own words. So none of this is made up, but none of this is kind of, concocted out of wrong information or doubtable sources.
But in your plan, eventually everyone would be taken off a private, the private plan that their company currently has.
Yes. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes. I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal.
On day one, we're going to repeal that tax bill.
But we've got to increase the corporate tax rate. And also looking at estate taxes are going to have to go up. And under my plan, there will also be a carbon fee. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy.
So as you can see, those are all very left-leaning positions. Those are far left-leaning positions. And many of them would not resonate well with voters in swing states. For example, her rejection of fracking, her signing up to the Green New Deal, her position on migration, about which we're going to talk in greater detail just in a few minutes. Now, these are all things, understandably, that the Democrats would like to delete from public memory, which they would like to memory hole. And I think it's the obligation of podcasts like mine and others to make clear that the American people have a choice in November, but the attempt that is undertaken by the media is to pretend that the actual choice that they have to make is not there, right? So they will create the idea that it's a dichotomy, that the choice is between the radical Donald Trump and the moderate centrist Kamala Harris. But in fact, it's exactly the other way around. In this upcoming election, and I cannot emphasize this enough, in this upcoming election, Donald Trump is the candidate of the moderates and Kamala Harris is the candidate of extremism. Now, the media knows, and this is really the tricky thing here, the media knows that most people long for a return to normalcy. Right? They don't want an extreme candidate, they want a common sense candidate. They want somebody who brings back, who reduces the exhaustion that so many people feel when it comes to the political process. And I think in many ways the current Donald Trump campaign has realized this, which is kind of why they swiveled in some areas to more moderate positions. And I think this was, from a strategic viewpoint, a very smart thing to do. But of course, they're up against a media environment which will try everything they can to obscure that swift from Trump to the center, and at the same time obscure that, as I said a couple of minutes ago, that the Democrats have decided to go with a radical candidate, right? As we saw in this graph before, for those who didn't see it, right, that if you run somebody whose legislative record in the US Senate is to the left of Bernie Sanders, that is not by any means, not by any stretch imaginable. This is not a centrist candidate. This is a far-left candidate. But this has been the game that the Democrats in the United States, but also the left in Europe, has been playing for a long time. Right? You have radical left-leaning positions, but they are recycled into the public imagination through the collusion with the legacy of mainstream media as being presented as quote-unquote moderate positions. But they are not, and I think this needs to be emphasized again and again and again and again. Most people in the West are sold radical positions as moderate positions, whereas those who stand for moderate and common sense solutions and positions are rephrased as radicals. And we can make this analysis like almost everywhere within the West. The positions of the right-wing parties in Austria, in Germany, in Italy, in France, if you kind of dig deeper and go beyond the headlines, most of their positions, you will say, wait a moment, those seems to be fairly reasonable positions, as we talked in the past, right? The idea to have an economy that is focused on increasing national wealth, the idea that a migration policy should be designed in a way that you get those people who are most compatible with your culture and that also bring an economic benefit. The idea that the people should be consulted before going to war or engaging in a proxy war with another nuclear power. So all these things are very moderate position. Nothing about that is radical. The AfD in Germany is not a radical party. Giorgia Meloni in Italy is not a radical politician. But remember, even in her situation, they tried to smear her as a post-fascist, as a Trojan horse for fascism returning to Italy. But nothing of this happened because, again, if we look at her agenda, she's far from being a radical. Many on the right are in fact disappointed of her legislative record because in their view she's not radical enough. But this is the game that is being played, that so many of the positions that 30, 40 years ago would have been entirely commonsensical, entirely centrist and moderate are now being rephrased as radical, as right-wing, as hyper, mega, ultra, over-the-top right positions. And this is something we have to fight against because this is simply telling people the untruth. Another thing, as I said, when we talk about the radicalism of Kamala Harris, now look at this tweet that was also made by the media recently and that got a wonderful community note from Elon Musk's X. So the CBS News Minnesota claimed that, and I quote, "Trump falsely accuses Harris of donating to Minnesota Freedom Fund, bailing out dangerous criminals. But luckily for us, under Elon Musk's leadership of X, a real-time fact check is possible." And yes, because Ms. Harris did promote the Minnesota Freedom Fund, and that post is still up. So this was an individual, Ms. Harris, who openly called upon people to donate to dangerous criminals. Now, again, free speech applies to everyone, so if she feels that these are people that were deserving of her support, good for her. But let's not pretend that this did not happen. So we are now in a situation where we have to fact-check the fact-checkers because they're also colluding within this media environment that I described before. They're also colluding with them in the attempt to memory hole all the radical positions that are usually held by the left. Or let's take another example. One person that is currently running parts of the campaign for Kamala Harris in June 2020 tweeted, a very short tweet, "Defund the police." Now, that is a radical position. I just want to remind everyone that during the riots of 2020, and even nowadays, like the idea to abolish police, defund the police, that is a very, very radical position. And yet such an individual will play a leading role in Kamala Harris's campaign to run for president. And once again, these people will be presented to you as moderates, whereas those standing up against these people will be presented as the radicals. So those who think that law and order is not just a fancy of the right, that this is not just something that the radicals support, but this is something that's necessary for everyone to enable a harmonious, productive, and secure life. Right? These people will once again be smeared as radicals, whereas those who said in the past and probably still believe it that you should defund the police, that you should abolish the police, these will be the people that will be presented to you as the moderates. So whichever label the media uses when they talk about the other side, be very careful. I would even go so far and say don't trust them. And I have another example, which I find is almost on the same level of the attempts that have been made in the past to conceal the health condition of Joe Biden. Now, you probably remember that Ms. Harris was in charge of the border, right? That she was the quote-unquote border czar, at least if we look at how the media reported it at the time. So, for example, NBC News reported back in the time that Biden tasks Harris with stemming the migration on the southern border. The vice president is expected to focus on both curbing the current flow of migrants and coordinating with countries in the region to address the root causes of migration. So apparently this was something that she was supposed to solve. Now, similar one, Politico, for example, had a very similar headline. They said that Biden makes Harris the point person on immigration issues and border search. Well, seems as if she indeed was the border czar, even though this, of course, is not an official title. Axios made a similar title when they talked about, Reuters had a similar headline. Biden names Harris to lead efforts with Mexico, Central America to stem migrant flow. So kind of all the main media outlets made this claim. A last one I have, this is my favorite one. Axios also reported that Harris, and they use actually the term border czar, appointed by Biden as border czar, said she would be looking at the root causes that drive migration. So obviously at the time, it was pretty clear to everyone, including the mainstream and legacy media, that Ms. Harris is the border czar, that she has been tasked by the president to solve the problems at the southern border, to take care of the records of illegal migration flooding into the United States, and that she, kind of as a, some would, if you want, euphemistic term, was the border czar taking charge of that. Now, as you probably all know, there is no real czar, just as there is no king in the United States. But this was a nice frame of reference to say that she has been endowed with significant leverage and significant powers to do something about what's happening at the border. Of course, we all know that she failed in that position. And this is pretty good ammunition for Republicans to say, wait a moment, you want to make somebody the chief executive of the United States who was not capable to successfully conclude a single task that she was given by the president. So instead of the media to critically engage with this very important question, they now say, whoa, wait a moment, she never was the border czar. So said medium Axios, for example, came out just a couple of days ago and said that she was never the border czar. That's all not true. That's a right-wing lie. But immediately they were confronted with the fact that they themselves used the term border czar. But once again, instead of admitting that they made a mistake, what did they do? Well, you can see it here. They added an editor's note saying that this article has been updated and clarified to note that Axios was among the news outlets that incorrectly labeled Harris a border czar back in 2021. So they are now rewriting history in real time. She was called the border czar for 3 years. And now all of a sudden, all the media that used that expression, that used that term, are saying, we used all of that, but it was wrong. Now, was it wrong the entirety of 3 years? Or is it now all of a sudden supposedly wrong because it would harm her election chances? I think we all know the answer to this question. And this is an important question because if the media is willing to literally try to rewrite history in a fashion, I have to admit, we've only seen under Stalin in the Soviet Union. I'm sure you remember the scenes that every time when Stalin had a purge, that the people that have been purged and of course very often killed, that photographs they were in with Stalin and other dignitaries, between quotation marks, of the Communist Party, they were brushed out. They kind of disappeared from the pictures. And this is literally what the media is currently doing to itself. So they know what they wrote a couple of years ago, so they either dispute their own headlines, they add editor's notes saying, we told you, because this is what this amounts to, we told you the untruth for 3 years and now we reverse course. Or, in the worst case, they outright lie to you, as they did, for example, when it came to the cognitive and health condition of Joe Biden, which, of course, makes us wonder, or at least it should make us wonder, what else did they lie about? Because apparently for them it's very easy to just go back and, as I said before, rewrite history in real time. The irony is that we are constantly being told that the media is, I'm sure you remember during the Trump years when the Washington Post had under every article this small moniker, this small headline, democracy dies in darkness. And that Donald Trump will bring America on the brink of fascism. And that the right will kind of push us closer and closer to totalitarianism. But if we take an actual cold hard look at not at what the media is saying, but how they are behaving, who is taking hints from totalitarian playbooks here? Who is trying to rewrite history, to gaslight the consumers of that media? It is not the right wing. It's also, by the way, not the right wing media. All of this happening is in the left wing and the legacy media. And it is astounding that they think they can get away with it. And I think it's very important for us not to let them get away with it. Because this will have an impact on the elections. Don't underestimate this. Because you, my viewers, my listeners, myself, we are junkies for politics, right? We listen to podcasts. We watch shows on YouTube, even if they're from obscure Austrians like myself. So we constantly immerse ourselves in the political debate. But many people, and this is, by the way, good for them, this is not an accusation, or not at all, but they have other things to do. They work all day, right? They be nurses, they be truckers. They are people who are very engaged in their community. Not everybody has the time to inform themselves about politics all day long and all the time. So they, due to no fault of their own, will believe a lot of the information that is coming from the mainstream media, that is coming from the legacy media. And what they create, not the people but the media, they create this kind of atmosphere in which, as I said before, Trump is perceived as a radical and Harris is perceived as a moderate, when in fact it's exactly the other way around. And to penetrate this kind of culture that is upheld by the legacy and mainstream media will be very, very difficult, and it is something that we try to do here, of course. And let me make another important point in the concluding minutes of this third episode. I always say that these issues are not limited to the United States, that these issues are not something that just applies across the Atlantic, it also applies in Europe. And I cannot stress this enough. I think the disgraceful and very often shameful role by the media must be on the top of the agenda of the right. This is one of the most important things. The monopoly of certain media outlets must be broken. And it's not just, as I mentioned, the case of the United States. It's not just what they report and how they report it. It is also what they don't report. It's also the kind of things that they don't want you to hear about. So I want to give you a quick example from Germany, because this is something I'm pretty sure you have not heard anywhere else. In Germany, there is currently a scandal brewing that, under any other administration, would make headlines around the globe. The headline that was picked by the German newspaper that broke it, Cicero, is, I think, quite appropriate. It's called Illegal, Legal, Whatever. And let me read the headline to you. Annalena Baerbock's Foreign Office is distributing thousands of visas to immigrants from all over the world. Its officials have been instructed to be generous, to the limits of the law and beyond. Security authorities had warned against this, but the Foreign Office ignored them. Now, let me tell you in greater detail what happened. The Foreign Minister of Germany, under Annalena Baerbock, advised its consulates and its embassies in Pakistan, Somalia, Afghanistan, and other places to hand out visas even if visa applicants used forged documents or had no documents at all. So, in other words, the Foreign Ministry of Germany basically acted like a human trafficker. So when you were in Pakistan, when you were in Afghanistan, and you came with fake documents or with no documents at all to the consulate, to the embassy, and say, I need a visa to go to Germany as a tourist, as whatever, you name it, to claim asylum, they were advised, the consulates and embassies, to accept these either non-existing or fraudulent documents. This is an absolutely insane story. Right? We have been told that it's a right-wing conspiracy theory to claim that the left has an agenda when it comes to mass migration, that they want to have as much migration as possible and beyond. Like, this was a conspiracy theory. Replacement, this is not happening, right? All of this is just something that was made up in the crazy minds of the right wing bubble. But more and more we find out that all these conspiracy theories probably have more than just a kernel of truth to them. Now, this should be headlines all over the world, that you have a German government that is openly conspiring against its own people by accepting fraudulent documents to increase the number of migrants to Germany from places where the people should have no right to go to Germany. There should be no right for somebody from Afghanistan to migrate to Germany. There should be no right for somebody from Afghanistan to migrate to Germany. The Germans have no historic responsibility towards those places, and the Germans, let's be completely honest here, the German economy does not need those people. And this brings me back to what I said early on. So what exactly is the benefit of having them come to Germany? There is none, except it serves the agenda of the left-wing parties. And I think this is something that cannot be stressed enough. As I mentioned in a previous episode, there is this sense on the left that the only way for Western civilization to atone for the sins of the past is through mass migration. And they are willing to go beyond the law. They're willing to break the law to achieve this. Now, and here's the insidious thing about this, just to clarify this once again. So the German government, the German Foreign Ministry, colludes in giving visas to migrants. So these people then come to Germany, and once they're in Germany, when the German government on some occasion tries to get rid of them again and deport them, they say you cannot do this because of the European Convention on Human Rights. So they break one law to get people into Germany and then appeal to another law in order to keep them there. So this is not equality for the law, equality in front of the law. This is a capricious application of the law wherever it serves one purpose, and in this case, this purpose is mass immigration. And this has real consequences. Let me give you another example from Austria. That again this should make headlines all around the globe, but it doesn't. On New Year's Eve in 2023-2024, a migrant from Tajikistan planned to conduct a terrorist attack in St. Stephen's. Now, as you can imagine, that should be a reason to deport somebody. But it turns out that at the moment, this person cannot be deported. And let me quote to you what that individual is saying, what that terrorist is saying. I want to say that I cannot return to Tajikistan. I'm a member of the political Group 24, and the government in Tajikistan believes that we are a terrorist group. Now, I cannot speak about the entire Group 24, but that individual is, by any available evidence, a terrorist. If you try to blow up a cathedral in Vienna on New Year's Eve, I think that's almost a textbook definition of a terrorist, of an attempted terrorist attack. But now, since apparently this individual is not just called a terrorist in Austria, but also in Tajikistan, he can use his being credibly accused of being a terrorist as an excuse of not getting deported. So you come to Austria, you try to conduct a terrorist attack, you get arrested, you get caught, and then you use the fact that you are a terrorist not to get deported back to your home country, because they also know that you're a terrorist. Now, this is literally the joke coming true, that the person who killed his parents is appealing to leniency of the court because he's an orphan. Now, it's very hard these days to be funny or satirical, because it seems that reality constantly overtakes what even for satire would have been deemed too much in the past. Which brings me to my last point today. As probably many of you know, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke in front of Congress just a couple of hours ago, and while he was speaking, you had the pro-Hamas, the pro-Palestine crowd rioting in the streets in Washington, including but not limited to burning American flags, hanging Donald Trump in effigy, and claiming on placards and also defacing monuments that Hamas is coming. Whatever that means, one can only hope that this is an empty threat. But this is, of course, a direct consequence of the immigration policy I was talking about before. But once again, this policy, in many ways, right, is of course made possible by people like Annalena Baerbock in Germany, by people like Kamala Harris in the United States. And these are radical policies. Open up your borders to anybody who can make it across, to allow anybody to come either with no documents or forged documents, is a radical position. But once again, you will be told that no, these are the moderates. Those are the moderate positions. And this is how you end up in a situation where, as we see from the United Kingdom to Michigan to parts in Western Europe, where then political Islam is playing a bigger and bigger role. Because there is a concerted effort by the media and by the legacy parties and the quote-unquote mainstream parties to enable this. And this is something I will talk to you about even more in the future, because this is not just happening in the realm of migration, which I picked as a topic today. It's also happening in the realm of environmentalism, where we are told that the radical environmentalist positions are the moderate position. It happens in the area of transgenderism, where we are told that the most radical proposals when it comes to transgenderism are the quote-unquote moderate positions. And this is, as I said, I think the biggest story of our time, is the reframing of moderate common sense positions into radical positions and the presentation of radical positions as moderate positions. More about this next week. I hope you tune in again. As you know, this is all still work in progress, and I hope it gets better as we move along. I implore you, I appeal to you to continue to follow me on this journey, because I think there is a lot more that gets either concealed by the mainstream and legacy media, or that is being a part of an attempt to gaslight you into believing something that is utterly untrue. And together, I believe we can turn the tide and should try doing so. Thank you very much. We'll see each other next week.